population. Now, as soon as people get more wealth, you think about them in India, 1.3 billion, soon to overtake China. China, 1.3 billion. And Africa is at 1.3 billion today. But by 2050, there'll be 2.5 billion people in Africa. And they have some of the fastest, growing economies of the world that are sort of hidden. No one knows about it, but it's happening. And as soon as people get more money, Shawn, the first thing they want to do is get a shelter over their family's head. The second thing is we're going to start eating meat,
Well, welcome, Max, and I apologize for all the reschedules. The good news is we've got a new studio, and she'll be our first guest.
Wow.
Use this new rig, so if I don't mess it up. So anyway, I'm recording on. So Felice, for sort of technical stuff, I'm recording this. I guess I'll send you the file afterwards. So Max, thank you so much, and I don't know if you guys can see my phone. I don't know. I've just got a picture of the steak I just had from you guys for breakfast. I really appreciate it. Been enjoying that very much. So,
great, Shawn.
You are a Kiwi by birth, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
So let us tell us a little about your background. It's kind of it's some interesting stuff I share a little bit in common with. So go ahead.
Right. Thanks.
For the other thing, but go ahead and let us know a little about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Shawn. And we do have something in common in that, as I understand, you spent some time in New Zealand, and that's where I was born and grew up, and my family still reside there. From down in the Southland in the deep South, and family were a farming family. We raised lamb for export, and we had beef cattle and dairy cattle. Everything's grazing, as you'll know. It's we're sort of grass farmers first, and then we happen to upcycle that grass through ruminants in New Zealand, and that was my family are still there, and in fact my sister is on our home farm still. I went to university at Lincoln College in Canterbury, New Zealand, and then after that I came to the US, Shawn, and have been back and forth 3 different times to live in New Zealand with my wife and our 3 sons, and but I've finally settled here in Minnesota in the US for the last let's say 25 years, Shawn. Yeah.
And so I lived in the Waikato. So I played rugby with the Mulu guys back in the days of I guess John Kerwin and Grant Fox and Richard Lowe, Warren Gatlin. I don't know if you remember those guys, but I
do. Legends.
I got to play against a few of those guys in the sort of in the league. So I was pretty privileged to be able to do that. That was many years ago. It was 30-some years ago.
Yeah. Well, you'd be doing good if you could keep up with John Kerwin.
Well, yeah. I mean, I actually, he was on the All Black. I think it was Warren Gatlin and Richard Lowe.
Sure.
I think the Gordon brothers and those are guys that I
nasty,
ran in the Waikato.
Nasty boys.
Yeah, it was a big forward country. So,
yeah.
But, so you've been around the world. I mean, I was looking at some of your background, and I was just kind of looking at some of the stuff, some of the background stuff. You've been all over the world, looking at the way we produce food. You're obviously a beef producer, and so tell us about the BetterFed Beef is what your brand, I guess, is, and you're a co-op of, I can't remember how many producers, quite a few up in the Midwest. What was the genesis of that? How did that come about?
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. And in fact, yes, I spent 28 years in international ag, working, developing business all around the world, predominantly, focused on food animals. So everything from shrimp and tilapia through salmon and obviously chicken, pig, dairy, and beef. So every food animal, that is being produced around the world, that's what I was involved with developing that business. And afforded me a tremendous opportunity to see the world and really appreciate, the significance of agriculture and the huge task before us, And so it's been a profound career that I have relished, But I retired from that career 2 years ago, and I wanted to start a new adventure, and that's the genesis of BetterFed Beef, which is, as you referred to, we are owner investors from 17 families that are all producing cattle here in the Midwest. So it's kind of a unique little company that's been built around sort of the ambition to accomplish a few things. And the first ambition would be to produce and bring the very best beef to the American consumer, you know, super tender and super consistent, and try and get away from that sort of inherent variation that's within beef. And so that's our first ambition. Second ambition of this BetterFed Beef journey is to connect consumers. And let's face it, the American consumer now, you know, overwhelmingly has never had anything to do with farming. It doesn't even know a farmer anymore. You know, the days of when you went to stay at your uncle's farm for the summer holidays and baled hay and fed cattle, you know, they're so distant from us now. Everyone's in a big metro area. But American consumers, we're finding they would love to connect with real farmers, you know, like the real deal, and get the straight story from the farmers too. And so the idea is to use technology, the internet, and connect our farm families with consumers, whether they're in, you know, Boston or San Francisco or out in Seattle. It doesn't matter. So make that possible, Shawn. And then the third thing is within these 17 families, all of them are 3 generations on the farm minimum. And they all got grandchildren, you know, and children, and they want to, you know, everyone talks about sustainability, Shawn, in ag, you know, and it's probably an over sort of overhyped, you know, feature, but where the rubber meets the road, economic sustainability is the king. And so we want to build a different future. If we could build a brand that the American consumer could trust and have full authenticity, and then that might build a better future for these next kids, you know, and next generation of the farms. And then the last thing is we need an adventure. And as Jordan Peterson says, you know, everyone, you know, needs to be called to the adventure of their life. And so myself and my wife, Karen, and our boys and their spouses, we're all involved. We're all deeply passionate about, you know, this new little adventure of bringing great beef into the world, Shawn. So yeah, that's sort of the background on BetterFed Beef.
Yeah, you know, as you may know, I mean, I'm obviously a huge proponent. I'm wearing a damn cow shirt on. I'm eating a carnivore diet, and I've got thousands of people that I've somehow convinced to do the same. And you know, I look at it from the health standpoint, and there is, as anyone who is not paying, you know, has paid any attention knows, there is a big push to either significantly reduce or even eliminate beef production or even animal agriculture altogether.
Right.
I don't know if that's realistic, if you feel that is something that's actually got legs behind it. I mean, I know that you've pointed out, I listened to another podcast where you're talking about there are some challenges with the agriculture in general, but certainly animal agriculture has its challenges. And, you know, you talk about meeting the demand of the world. It's a growing world, or at least we think it's going to be. And, you know, high quality nutrition is extremely important. And so what do you think is going to play out over the next, you know, 10 to 15, 20 years? Are we all going to be eating bug burgers, or what are we doing in 20 years?
Yeah. By hell. It's such a big question, and it's such an important one, Shawn. We got a bunch of people coming, you know. We're at 7.6 billion now, and in 30 years time, we'll be at, you know, 9.6 billion on the planet. And you know, the majority of them are going to be in the developing world. 80% of the human growth will, in the next 30 years, will come from Africa and Asia. And it's not going to be from the already developed world like America here. The appetite for food, we have to produce 70% more food in the next 30 years, 70% more. And of course, we want to do that with the smallest footprint, you know, as Andrew McAfee wrote a great book called More for Less, you know, and that is the guiding principle of modern intensive agriculture, food production. get more from less. So that I firmly believe we have to keep that ethos, Shawn. We can't regenerate, we can't regress with sort of, backward technologies, because we got so many more people to feed. And then you throw it on top, Shawn, you'll appreciate this, as people get more money, affluence, and thanks God, the human prosperity has been increasing with free markets and trade. And like we're in an epoch of like magnificence in terms of lifting people out of poverty, and quality of life and life expectancy, is doubled in like 80 years. It's staggering. And nutrition. Okay, so now we come back to nutrition. Now, as soon as people get more wealth, you think about them in India, 1.3 billion, soon to overtake China. China, 1.3 billion. And Africa is at 1.3 billion today. But by 2050, there'll be 2.5 billion people in Africa. And they have some of the fastest, growing economies of the world that are sort of hidden. No one knows about it, but it's happening. And as soon as people get more money, Shawn, the first thing they want to do is get a shelter over their family's head. The second thing is we're going to start eating meat. It's like we're going to add some meat to the starch and the tapioca and the rice and or the potatoes, And so meat demand is going to be huge. Like it's going to grow faster than demand for starches and carbohydrates, Shawn. Now, how do we do it? Well, beef has a huge role to play, and I've heard you talk, and I just finished reading your book, and it was tremendous. But beef have a huge role to play in upcycling, inedible nutrients. But there's other things that we can do too, Shawn, like non-terrestrial animals. When I said we need to minimize our footprint, so we need, we'll go into the sea more, especially Asia and Africa with the coastlines, producing seafood. Fish and shellfish, mollusks, and that'll relieve some of our arable land, demand. And then, but if we keep adopting technology, Shawn, this really is the key to our, human ingenuity is just staggering. We escaped the Malthusian trap, a bunch of times already, and we'll have no doubt we'll do it again, if we liberate farmers to take up technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'm often made aware of technology with regards to sustainability, which you point out is, I think it's important, but it isn't, you still got to, live in the world of economic realities. And so I hear about, methane sequestration, you hear the digesters on the dairy farms and, trapping methane and turning it into natural gas, and they're trying to stick masks on cows in the UK, and they're feeding them red algae. And some of this stuff is kind of like, I don't know how much it's going to make a difference or if it's important or not. But there's other technology, you pointed out the U.S. is the most efficient country in the world when it comes to, we produce I mean, you look at, we've got 93 or so million head of cattle in the U.S. and you compare it to Brazil, which is, 220, 250, and we still outproduce those guys.
Yeah.
India has 200 plus million head of cattle, and they produce almost nothing. Their output is abysmal relative to the number of the cattle they have. And so what are some of these technologies that you see as, what are we looking at? How do we continue to improve? I know, like, land footprint, greenhouse gas footprint, water footprints, all have dropped significantly since the 1970s here in the U.S. But what can we do, like, to meet that demand, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, bang on. Here's some good news. The U.S. is the reference for the world in beef production and dairy now. And so. Why I say that's good news is because two things, Shawn, is one is like we have this bastion of know-how here, right? And it's fine-tuned over, it's been through the ringer here, like producing beef as example for the last really intensively since the 1960s, and on our dairy side, which contributes beef as well. Because of this great environment that America affords people if they have freedom to act and agency, this competitive and ingenuity. Well, we see our US beef as example. In the last 60 years, since 1960, we've increased our beef production 70%. And in the same time, we reduced 10 million head of cattle. So 70% more beef, 10 million fewer head of cattle. Like you said, we're at about 93 million head today, you know, and at one time in 1975, we peaked at 132 million. So we're getting more for less. That's the key. And then also on greenhouse gases, the US is the leader on emissions. So in that same period, we produced 70% more beef, and we reduced emissions, you know, CO2 equivalent emissions by 40%. So the good news is that the US developed the system using feedlots, confinement feeding, and feed yards, this intensification of producing beef, which is like super efficient. And as you mentioned, Brazil, India, China, you know, the rest of the world are magnitudes of order less than us in terms of converting food into ribeyes. And so the good news is the US can be such a force for goodness in the world, you know, by exporting the know-how, you know, and I spent, like I said, 28 years involved in this, exporting, you know-how, technical, practical know-how from the US all through the Middle East and North Africa and Asia. And so, you know, they can learn so much from us, Shawn, and increase their levels of production are so low that that their opportunity for gain, for gains in efficiency in producing food, while looking after cattle better, you know, like let's not leave the animal out of this. The animal can be looked after better and have a super good quality of life and health. He doesn't, it's not a zero-sum game. Everyone can win at this, you know, and I'd like to make that point, Shawn.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about confinement, you know, CAFOs and intensive feeding and feeding on grain, a lot of people are really, they don't like that. It's a factory farm. It's awful for the animals. The animals are all sick. You know, they're all diabetic. They're all being given antibiotics because they're sick. This is a perception among, you know, people that just casually sort of think about eating, you know, in the fitness industry and the health industry. I've been to feedlots. I don't think these animals are mistreated. I mean, when I go there, they got plenty of room. They look, you know, I don't know. I can't get in the mind of a cow. I don't know what they think, what they value. But what do you say to the critics that say, hey, you know, intensive agriculture is bad. It's bad for the animal. It's bad for the environment. It's unethical. It produces a product that's going to make us sick relative to sort of, you know, grass finished, grain finished, regenerative agriculture. I know, because I know there's a battle, and I honestly, I mean, I peripherally know more than the average person about this stuff, but I'm not a farmer. I'm not a rancher. I'm not in this industry. And I think it makes sense to talk to the actual experts that are actually in there. And I would consider you one of those. Clearly, you've been doing it your whole life or most of your life. So what are your thoughts and concerns about that? Should we go to a regenerative style? Can the cow-calf operations graze regeneratively and then stick them in a feedlot at the end? Or what's the deal there?
Whoa. Very good, very good. You've opened up a seven-headed hydra, you know. I love it. I love it. But thanks God you're asking these questions, Shawn, you know, because this conversation has to happen, you know, like it must happen if we're gonna meet the goal. And so I like to start things maybe by saying, what is the goal? And so if the goal is just to have you know, all cattle grazing grass, like in New Zealand, right? In the Matamata, you know, and I call it the Shire from Lord of the Rings, you know, everything's idyllic.
I lived in Cambridge, which is right next to Matamata. Yeah, so I know it's like
so
where they
you're right
film
there.
Yeah, I lived there.
Yeah, so if it's going to be beautiful green grass, you know, 12 months a year and rolling hills and cattle on there and the sound of music playing in the background, you know, well, you know, that's if that's the goal, then you know, a couple of things are going to happen with the demand for beef in the world. The people aren't going to be able to afford it, and that would be terrible, or it's not going to be available to them, which would be terrible because beef protein is, you know, is magical for health. And then the third thing is the environment's going to suffer like hell. You know, like people are worried about the stereotype is that we keep burning the Amazon to create more grazing land, you know, converting the Amazon forest. And the reality is, if you pursue low intensification agriculture, there is no other way to produce more food, you know, animal food or crop food than to, you know, we're already maximizing our arable land footprint. Something like 1.4 billion hectares is, you know, is already in production, and there's no more to be had. You know, we're just going to get into marginal lands and fragile lands, and we'll do way more damage than good. Okay, so back to this big question of what to do about it. What I would say about it is, I would say that we can have our cake and eat it too. This is the beautiful message. An intensification, like finishing cattle in feed yards, is very purposeful, and we can maximize like the use of our rangelands. You know, on the prairie, we have 700 million acres of rangeland, you know, which deserves to stay in pasture. We should have learned from the Dust Bowl years, you know, not to dig up that turf ever again. And so we take our wonderful resource, which is grass, but then as those cattle get close to finishing, maybe the last 5 months of their life, we bring them to the feed yards and our confinement facilities, or comfort, you know, we call them comfort barns, where our cattle are. And that's where we can take advantage of adding, you know, more dense, complicated, complex diets, rations, you know, which include grain and byproducts. And then we have this, you know, tremendous benefit in growth of the cattle, and we can increase growth finishing times by, you know, 30-40% versus being on grass the whole time. So less water used, you know, and there's a bunch of really good research being done on this, repeated over and over, but, you know, less water, 75% less water, 45% less land needed, 44% less cattle needed, you know, 29% less fuel needed, you know, less emissions, greenhouse, less methane, less, you know, overall footprint, resource footprint. So, so we need to have an objective mind about this, sort of like concentric circles. One is, what would be great, what would be good for the animal? You know, our contract with the animal responsibility is like, let's look after this animal so that it has a quality life from its birth all the way to the day it's harvested. That's our contract, our human contract with the animals that we love and care for. The second thing is, we have a contract, a responsibility to the environment. Let's farm so that generations to follow can continue this endeavor, and let's farm with the smallest footprint possible so that we can return more land back to nature and recreation. And then the third piece of it is, let's produce, you know, food that by all means can be as affordable as possible for the consumer, you know, because we have so many people to feed, and the barrier to entry of eating good proteins, you know, is an economic barrier, right? In order, if people are going to eat higher quality proteins, they got to have, you know, we got to make it affordable to them, and not just make beef, turn beef into some exclusive boutique thing that, you know, only a few people could enjoy. You know, we got to be careful about this. Yeah.
You'd mentioned, you know, the growth of, you know, I know India is going to overtake Africa, or not India, is going to overtake China as the most populous country, I think by 2030 or something. There's a projection they'll go to 1.4, and you mentioned Africa is going to be 2.5 billion. Can those countries feed themselves? Are they going to have to rely on, or those countries in continent, are they going to be able to feed themselves? Can they level up their efficiency to where they could be independent, or are they going to rely on the U.S. to feed them, or Canada, or, you know, Brazil to have to feed them? What's going to happen with those guys?
Well, Shawn, dang, they can do it, Shawn, if they're allowed to. You know, Norman Borlaug, you're familiar with him, Shawn? Norman Borlaug?
No, not familiar.
He has the a Nobel Peace Prize for his being the father of the Green Revolution. And well, he opined, he died, but he had the Nobel Prize, and he opined that, you know, we can feed 10 billion people if we're allowed to. So I think for sure these India and Africa can do it, Shawn. In Asia, if we allow them the technologies and we help them with that, right? We can share our knowledge and know-how, and we can trade that. You know, it's super valuable. It doesn't mean we have to give it all away. They're willing to pay. You know, these people are pride. You know, they're proudful people. They don't. In fact, they're sick of being given everything, you know, and like an aid. And I mean, that's a different story we could chat about sometime, but they definitely want to adopt technology, the farmers of the nations in Africa and India. But the big arm wrestle at the moment is, you know, and it really is a big issue, is that there's a lot of, you know, NGOs and in particular Europe that are trying to prohibit African nations. You know, there's 54 countries in Africa. It's not just one country, it's 54 of them. And they're hungry. You know, Nigeria will be the 4th largest, most populated country in the world by like 2070. It'll have 700 million people in Nigeria. It's like, dang. And, but they have magnificent opportunity if we, you know, if we open access for them, Shawn, and they can become a large part self-sufficient. And the US will always have a role in trading, you know, our grains and maybe our super quality beef, as example. You know, we'll be able to segment the markets that the US plays a role in export. But the good news is if we liberate them and help them with technology, the US could play such a profound role in the next, you know, 30, 50 years with helping humanity in a fundamental way, you know, like not rhetoric, but actually getting her done, you know. Yeah.
There's, as you're probably very well aware, in the United States, most of the beef production is controlled by four corporations: JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef, or now known as Marfrig. I think 2 of them are Brazilian companies. You guys operate outside of that system, I believe. Right. What is there an issue with that? I mean, I know, like, again, peripherally observe the meat industry and ranchers, and I know there's some frustration. There's frustration with the national leadership through NCBA. What has to change? Do you think something needs to change, or where? I mean, I know we saw this pandemic it certainly amplified the bottleneck issues with processing facilities and packing facilities, and whose interests are being represented at the national level. What are your thoughts on U.S. production, and do we need to change the system here?
Yeah, awesome question. And so let's start with the big 4, and you hit them on the head. You know, 2 are Brazilian, 1 is Chinese, Smithfield, and of course Tyson and Cargill, American companies. But so that they have a role to play, and they're not, you know, and I know Congress keeps, you know, periodically making some noise about the big 4 controlling 85% of our food, animal processing, beef in particular. And fair enough, you know, to look at that. But this goes all the way back to the Packers stockyard, you know, in the early 1900s with Teddy Roosevelt, when they tried to break up a different big 4, but that time they controlled 70% of the cattle processing. So 120 years later, Shawn, we've still got the same, you know, we're working with the same machine. And I would, in fairness to the big 4, they play a super important role in that, you know, they process 120,000 head of cattle a day, and they're super efficient, you know, and their distribution and their expertise is, you know, they're world leaders at this. But there is an opportunity, you know, the frustration with the cattlemen, and that's why we formed BetterFed Beef, is our guys, our 17 families are putting their heart and soul into raising the best beef. And unfortunately, when the market is so big and concentrated, there's no, you know, there's no price competitiveness and at the farm level. So our guys, you can imagine, they produce the very best beef. It's they're so proud of it, but they're getting the commodity price. So how could you extract some more value out of this system? And I think that's where we need to disrupt it. There's room for disruptors in this market. And one of the things that our mission with BetterFed Beef is if we could create a different pathway to the market, direct to consumer, it could be replicated, it could be replicated by groups like us all over America. There's no reason why it couldn't be. Another dozen farmers get together and replicate this, or 20 of them or whatever, and innovate, away from the big commodity packers, and try and get a better price for your premium beef. If you can get, if you can get in touch with the American consumer who's looking for something, that you could offer. I think, technology affords this disruption, Shawn. Like, the timing is good, actually.
And you may be familiar with Mike Calicrate. I've interviewed him before. I think he ranches direct beef. I think he's I want to say he's out of Kansas, maybe Colorado, Kansas. But so I mean, your model is not completely unique in the United States as far as that thought is going on. But I mean, right. So let me ask you, because the commodity beef market, we see that the ranch is getting proportionally less and less return on their work. I mean, they're taking all the risk by taking this cow. Yeah. And dealing with it for 6 to 12 months as a rancher, and then another 3 to 4 months as a feeder.
Yeah.
They've got all the risk, but they get very little of the reward, where the reward is on the retail side and the packer side. But right. How does so when you say we're doing the best beef, explain what that means? I mean, because a lot of people are naive. I mean, what's better about BetterFed Beef compared to what I can go pick up at Costco or something like that?
Right, Shawn. Well, it should be, for us, the measure of better is really threefold. One is better tenderness, better flavor, and better consistency. We think we can win in these 3 areas, and we think all 3 are important to consumers, beef lovers. And so everything we're doing within our system is to fine tune this, so that we can have more consistent, more flavorful, more tender beef all the time. And that only happens because of, our beef system in America. It's very disparate, meaning it's spread over, thousands and thousands of families raising cattle. And that's another thing, the misnomer about industrial, factory farming. 95% of our farms are all family owned. But anyway, our beef, we take control of the genetics. So we choose the sire, and then we're artificial inseminating with the best bulls into a Jersey cow. So that's a dairy cow, and it's a non-obvious mother, actually, to choose for a beef animal, but it's like a serendipitous genetic trait that the little Jersey cow, she's just like a little fawn, a deer fawn, they're beautiful and small and gentle, but she has a remarkable ability to put fat in her milk. And that's why she's prized, for cheese and ice cream and yogurt. And but that same genetic ability can go into intramuscular fat, which is marbling, versus subcutaneous fat. And then we cross her through artificial insemination. So we're using the very best bulls, and now we have a progeny that's very uniform versus a lot of traditional beef, which has a lot more variation in it, Shawn. Yeah. Then comes management and nutrition. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So again, you live in Minnesota, and I know a lot of your members are in that area: Wisconsin, Minnesota, I don't know, Illinois, Indiana, perhaps, I don't know, but that's different than someone in New Mexico or Arizona or Texas. They're not going to be able to raise the same breed of cattle. I mean, due to the weather and forage availability. So how do you? I mean, because you said, well, it's consistency, but how does someone do this in Texas? I mean, they're going to be using Angus cattle, and surprisingly, there's a lot of black Angus in Texas, which I understand. You don't want black cows in the heat. I mean, I don't know, but What do they do in other places? I mean, how do they, because consistency, they can't all raise ONYA cattle everywhere, I don't think, or maybe they could, I don't know.
Right, right. Yeah, ONYA, our certified ONYA cattle is constrained by, the number of Jersey cow mothers in the market, because there's no constraint on how much bull semen you can get. But certainly you're right on the on the dam side, it's constrained, Shawn. And but the same principle will be applied. American beef industry our farmers are great adopters of technology. If you can show them ways to improve, they'll do it. They'll pick it up. And so the principles about getting rid of variation in beef can be applied, like more AI for bull selection, and then more fine-tuning management and feeding, and and if you get that more fine-tuned and more under control, then you'll remove a lot of variation from the final product. Yeah. So up in the North Country where we are, our cattle are all raised in what we call comfort barns, and they're designed to keep cattle, because our weather up here is atrocious. Like, people keep asking me, why the hell did you move here from New Zealand? Well, it's because of my great wife. It's the best of reasons, but it's tough climate up here, Shawn. We're still got snow in the ditches, and 7 months of winter. And so cattle, it's different, like you said, to New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, Texas, where they're dry. So I think the beauty is we have to remember this, again, back to the all grass or grass finished, grass raised, grass finished versus grain, and, using byproducts and stuff. What we need to do is we need to have this bigger concept in our mind of fit for purpose, right? And I love this, fit for purpose. It's like parsimonious. In the Midwest up here, we're in the Corn Belt on our right hand, and on our left hand is the Dakotas, range country. So we can utilize both, bring them together. We can use comfort barns, which are big monoslope barns. They have sunshine shine in them deep, keep them dry. They're dry. They're out of the snow and the ice and the mud, and they're super comfortable, and low stress, and they perform very well. Now you go down to Texas, they don't have the rain and the mud and the snow, so open lots there can work better. But as long as you alluded to with their black coat, we need shade, we need heat abatement, and so we have to we sort of have to fit the matrix together that makes the most sense, with our geography, climate, and food availability.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fair to say there's no one size fits all. And if I look at like folks that are proponents of the regenerative, so I interviewed Alan Savory a few years ago. I'm sure you're familiar with him, and he says it's all about management, and he couldn't give me he couldn't tell me what to do. It's just like, it depends on where you're at. It was very, very kind of I get it. I mean, it's an interesting interview, but it's just like I can't tell you anything really. It's depends on your topography and your water access and climate and breed of cattle and on and on and on. And so it's obviously it takes a lot of thought. And I mean, obviously if you live with cows every day, you think about it quite a bit. Yeah. You mentioned, I think this is because as I weirdly am interested by meat science. As a physician, it's kind of interesting, but learning about the differences in the fatty acid profiles between, like you mentioned, subcutaneous fat and intramuscular marbling. It seems to me, and again, it's hard to make health claims because there's not a lot of studies in humans on what type of beef they're eating. It's very scant. There's very little literature on that. Right. But it seems to me the intramuscular marbling has a different type of fat profile than subcutaneous fat, and I was told that steers have a different deposition versus the cows or the heifers, and so can you speak to any of that? Is there any science behind that you understand about the difference in the way fat deposition is, or how that cows display their nutrition based on how you feed them?
Yeah, well, I can speak a little bit, Shawn. My partner, Dr. Tom Peters, is a consulting famous nutritionist from the cattle industry. He could talk about it for hours, and our son has just got his PhD in ruminant cattle nutrition as well. And so they know way more than me. But in principle, a couple of things, Shawn, is you know, when any calf is born, I think they have a fixed number of like adipocyte cells, which are the ones that you can put lipid into. And so then in our beef breeds, in particular the one we're focused on, this Jersey cross, so they have a higher propensity for this intramuscular marbling by benefit of their genetic makeup. And some other cattle don't have that. Like as example, the Bos indicus type cattle, you know, that we find in the tropical areas in Brazil and through Asia, you know, they're the ones with the floppy ears and the big hump on the back. They have very low ability for intramuscular marbling. So genetics is huge, Shawn. And then after that, it's nutrition, you know, nutrition and time. And so all our cattle are fed, you know, I mean, in the US, most of them have diets, rations formulated by PhD nutritionists. Like these guys are seriously good at what they do, way better than what humans, you know, the way humans are eating and looking after diets. So, but the fat is different. You know, I've seen the studies looking at if you just finish grass, like in New Zealand or Australia, you know, you'll have a higher omega-3s versus grain-fed finished cattle like us. And when I say grain, I mean conventionally finished. That can be cottonseed, distillers grains, brewers grains, you know, linseed meal, citrus pulp, sugar beet pulp, you know, all kinds of other products. They get lumped in to be grain fed, but there's actually a big matrix of different nutrients. And that's where we can really get intramuscular fat, but the fat, you know, and the fine tuning of the fat makeup will be different, Shawn, versus just like grass finished cattle. And but what I'd like to say about that is I see there's a battle being played out by the unfortunate battle, almost a tragic one if it doesn't get if we don't pull it up here pretty quick. It's a devour your brother strategy that makes me sad. You know, I see a lot of the grass-fed, grass-finished. They're trying to grow their market by tearing down the big brother, you know, which is conventionally fed cattle. And there's no need to do this. You know, we can all benefit. You know, we can all raise our cattle responsibly and help people's health and nutrition. I don't think it's not helpful to tear down your cousins and your brothers who are doing a tremendous job as well. And on omega-3s, and then, you know, higher as example in CLAs in grass-fed cattle, but it's so small. You know, the question you need to say is it different? Yeah. Does it matter? Well, no, it doesn't matter. You know, eat a meal of salmon a week and you'll get 30 to 40 times the level of omega-3s as example than you will from eating either a grain-fed or a grass-fed cow, you know.
Yeah, you know, I actually had someone do that very experiment. They ran an omega-3, omega-6 index on themselves after a month of eating grass-fed, a month of eating grain-fed, and the difference was pretty minimal. And then one experiment, they added some salmon once a week, and it was a huge difference. And so, again, you point out it is different, but is it clinically significant?
Right, Shawn.
The data I've got data on 12,000 people doing a pure meat diet, and the outcome of who got better, who got off medicines, who lost weight between the two groups is insignificant. There's no real difference. And I tell people, I get very angry about that because I'm like, how dare you promote grain finishing? I'm like, look, I don't have any objective evidence that would point to one being superior than the other. Now, if you have an environmental belief, do what makes you feel best. One of the concerns, again, and I keep bringing this up, is, you know, that some people will look at you and say, hey, you know, he's a factory farm guy. He's making sick cows and he's, you know, destroying the environment. And I get that and some of it comes from other ranchers. You know, you'll get other ranchers to say, you know, and they've left. The problem, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some of them left. They've been in the commodity market. They did that for years, and then they for whatever reason they said, I don't like it. I think it's awful. And they left, and they're very passionate about that. And they're very compelling because it's like, well, look, I'm making more deers come back and there's more bees in my field and birds are flying in and stuff like that. Do you have a concern about like one of the big topics, and you mentioned this about tilling, the Dust Bowl, we tilled up all the land in the Midwest and we had the Dust Bowl in the 30s or something like that.
Yeah. 30s.
How do we continue to intensively graze or intensely finish animals and not get into the same Dust Bowl issue? Can we, because there's a lot of arguments about monocropping. You spray a pesticide or herbicide, you kill everything, you scorch the earth, and all you grow is soybeans and corn. How do we make that better and more sustainable and still utilize it to finish our cattle?
Yep. Brilliant. The good news is the good news, Shawn, is there's a way to do this. I keep saying we can have our cake and eat it too. We can win on many fronts here. That's the good news. But we got to understand what we're wrestling with, a little bit as well. And so let me touch on a couple of things. One is this idea I mentioned before, devour your brother. And it's a little bit like I see it with a regenerative ag, organic ag, ecological ag, within those things, within those so-called disciplines, let's say, or philosophies, they're more like philosophies. There's some very good principles that every farmer I know around the world is trying to follow many of the principles. That every farmer I know is very interested in how the hell can I stop erosion, soil erosion? Like that's top of the list, because this is the biggest hole in the leaky bucket, soil erosion. So let's get serious about that. They're all serious. They're all very concerned about, how minimum till and precision ag, like adopting technology so that we're using more from less pesticide, herbicide, less times the tractor runs through the field, less disturbance. We're using cover crops. So we're already using, if I went to the 17 families that are within BetterFed Beef and said, are you a regenerative farmer? They probably look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? Like they're not even really, they're like, well, we're farming using the very best principles on every front that we know, And if I explain, well, regenerative farming means, that you try to disturb the soil less as possible, and we want to have soil fertility, and we want to use as much manure strategically as we can, and they'd be like, yeah, we love that, we're doing that. So the deal is, the part of the problem, the frustration is, as we try to say, well, grain finishing or grain feeding cattle is bad, and it's bad because of why? It's industrial project, it's factory farming, a whole bunch of slurs go with it, and it's bad for cattle, and we're poisoning them because cows aren't supposed to eat those diets. It's like that, and this to me is a tragedy, and how do we avert this tragedy? Well, I think it's education. We have to educate people and it's difficult, but we need to win the hearts and say, look, number one is this system exists so that we can produce more food with a smaller environmental footprint, and we'll use a lot less resources, and we'll get a lot more meat from it, and we can return more land to nature. And if we just go all grass and all range land feeding, then we're going to have to, use a lot more of everything to try and produce. Look, there was some work done by Swain et al. In 2017, looked at the U.S. system, and within that system on producing beef, they said that in order to, if we were to go all grass fed and eliminate conventionally feeding cattle, we would need 10 to 28 times more land, to grow that amount of beef globally. And then in the US, Hayek is from Harvard in 2018, did a study looking at just the US situation. And they said that our grasslands that we have here today can only support 60% of the US herd. So 60 million cattle versus, 95 million. So we're either going to have less beef if we go all grass, or we're going to have to import, to fill that gap. Well, okay, we're already importing 80% of all grass-fed beef. It's imported. No one knows it because we don't have country of origin labeling. So, but look, you think about if the same people are concerned about the environment for grass feeding, surely they're concerned about, carbon footprints as well. And what about food miles? If you're flying beef in from New Zealand and Aussie and Brazil and Uruguay and Chile, I mean, you see what I mean? If we can't fill our beef needs here locally, then where else are we going to get it? There's only one other alternative is to import it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the critics of, like, particularly the Hayek study said, I think he was not. I don't know if he's not even an agronomist or something. I don't know that. I know that I've seen a criticism of that particular study, but I wonder, as far as there is, this. Well, you mentioned it. There's not much. Just like the beef industry in general. I mean, I can remember Beef is What's for Dinner is the last sort of beef propaganda, if you will, that I can remember. I mean, I don't think that the National Cattlemen's Beef, sorry, the NCBA has done a particularly good job of advertising to the public in general about meat. And then even worse are, the sort of conventional phase guys. The regenerative guys are telling the story. They've got this very emotionally compelling story about how they're restoring the environment, and the deers and the foxes and the skunks and the birds and the bees are coming back and the land is being regenerated. But you don't see any attempt by the conventional ranchers to tell their story or explain. I think they're basically enemy number one when it comes to food production, even among people that eat beef. And I think that's something that the onus is on these people. I'm going to be speaking in front of the California Cattle Feeders Association at the end of May, and I just got to tell these guys, hey, either you're bad guys or you're going to convince people you're not. And you got to at least get in the game, because you're going to lose if not. And I think that's as you said, they're eating their brothers. And like I said, I think beef in general is wonderful. We should all eat more of it, and animal products in general. And it's a tough message to sell, because I don't get cooperation. It's hard to do that when we don't even have the cattlemen sticking up for themselves. And I realize, like you mentioned, they're, nose to the grindstone, just grind work, right. and they haven't been in the position where they've had to defend what they're doing for a living, because it seems like it would have been obvious, but a lot of people don't understand. Everybody lives in the city. They don't know what it's like to. I live kind of near. I'm kind of rural now, but.
Yeah,
I can't claim I'm a rancher.
Yeah, but you've taken the initiative, Shawn. Like you've been out and visited feed yards and cattle ranches, and so you've taken a lot of initiative to learn, and see it yourself. And I'd also say you've done more to promote beef, than the NCBA by a magnitude of 10 or 20.
And I don't know.
You're a beef marketing machine.
Well,
I love it.
But that's the sad, and I don't know if I know they're doing some lobbying behind closed doors and all that stuff, but the sad thing is I shouldn't be the guy that has to do that. I mean, it seems like you shouldn't have some weirdo doctor promoting an industry that he doesn't even participate in other than as a consumer, which I think I'm thankful that it's there. And I thank ranchers every day. Every time I tell them, hey, I love what you guys do. Anything I can do to help you, I want to, because you are essential to me being alive and thriving, being a happy, healthy human being. But I don't know. I mean, it's like, at least the censorship, hopefully I worry about, like saying, hey, I eat meat is now considered a hate speech or something like that, which some people think it is. And some people would like you not to say that, but interesting times we live in. Yeah.
Well, we need to, we need to engage in the fight. It is a fight. And we also need to assume that everyone else, let's say our adversaries, right, the vegan philosophers and the bug, cellular meat adherents that are coming, and but we should operate from the basis that, okay, they have good intentions, they're just misguided, And why are they misguided? Well, we should take some of that on us as cattlemen, because we're so bad at articulating what we love to do and what we're proud of. But, you know, we want to just keep it in our tiny little communities and not share it with anyone. So, you know, shame on us. You know, we've done a very bad job of educating the American consumer. And goddamn, the American consumer just loves beef. He was like born to love the West and the beef, you know. But tragically, we see beef, you know, consumption going down in America. You know, we peaked at like 90 pounds per man, woman, and child, and now we're down to 56 pounds, you know. Well, that's a bloody tragedy because Americans love to eat beef, you know, and the dang chickens are winning, you know, and that should be unconscionable. So
yeah, I agree with that. I think,
yeah,
although I've seen like over the last year or two, it's trended up a little bit. So maybe we went from 55 to 56. So it's going up. I'll take credit for that. You know?
That's you. Yeah.
It's my impact. But no, I mean, like I said, you know, you can look back I think 77 was the year we peaked in beef consumption in the US at about 130, you know, pounds per person per year. And, that is when, you know, and since that time, since it's gone down, we've just seen from our health standpoint, again, you can't say it's causal, but my gosh, we're eating more chicken, less beef, and we're fatter and sicker and everything's getting worse. And, you know, there's other things that go in there. We're eating more processed food and garbage. But one thing's clear to me.
Carbohydrates, Shawn, you know.
Well, I think it's, you know, not just carbohydrate, but I think it's a processed food, and much of that is processed carbohydrates. You know, the cheap stuff is carbohydrate. I think somebody educated me that sugar is probably the most, from a calorie to you know, requirement, is one of the most economical foods to produce is sugar, and so it's in everything, and it's cheap, and then we throw fiber in there, which you can't even. You know, wood pulp. I mean, you know, methyl cellulose is, you know, basically some wood pulp we throw in some half of our food, and we're eating sugar and fiber, or sugar
binder.
and binders and stuff like that.
But our cattle that's the magic of a ruminant, you know. Their digestive physiology can handle all of these, you know, waste products. So as we talk about feeding the world, you know, 40% of our food, human food, is wasted. You know, it goes in the rubbish bin or it expires. But, you know, cattle, this is a hidden benefit of our conventional feeding. And it's not by happenstance that our confinement feeding, you know, facilities are located closer to the cities, big cities. It's because, and it's not a coincidence that the #1 dairy state is California. You know, they went there because of all of the, you know, California is the breadbasket of America for growing, you know, vegetables and crops and fruits. Well, all of that, you know, fruit and the winery, the pomace, the seeds and the skins and the sticks and the citrus pulp and all the, you know, and the brewery and the distillers and all of these we can cycle them through, you know, these magical digestive system of a cow and turn it into ribeyes, you know. And you can only do that through what we call feed yard, confinement feeding, finishing. We can't do that on the prairie.
Yeah, and again, that's a tough, you know, like I said, there's some people that just are going to say that is just not what they're designed to eat, and it's making me sick. And I would love to see actual studies being done to sort of sort that out, because there's very little. I mean, Texas A&M did a study a few years ago, grass finished versus grain finished ground beef, and they looked at a few biomarkers and not much different. But there's just not much out there. So I mean, it's tough to say. Hopefully, you know, maybe, you know, it seems like NAMI, you know, North American Meat Institute, or somebody like that has the funds. They could do that study and just say, look, let's get some human data, because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, you don't have cattle producers if you don't have people eating them, right? I mean, it's an important question to answer, and I think that's something that needs to be done, and hopefully someone will step up and do that study.
Yeah, I think I think you hit it right on the head. The overwhelming message should be, you know, all beef is good, whether you're raising it in Egypt or in New Zealand, or you're in Jordan, you know, and beside Israel, or if you're in Brazil, or here, you know, in the heartland of America, or up in Alberta. It's all good. And as long as we honor the contract with the animal and the environment, more beef is going to help humans, you know, to grow and be healthy. And so it's like, you know, this is a big game we can't afford to lose. And the overwhelming message, to your point, like, let's run these studies and show people that the health, there is no different health outcome in terms of, you know, clinical disease in people or life expectancy or whatever measure of health, you know, whether we're feeding them conventionally or all on grass, like in New Zealand or in, you know, in Victoria, Australia, or in the Oceania region of Chile, you know, versus right here in Minnesota or in Texas. You know, if you eat beef, you know, you are gonna benefit from it. So God bless beef, and let's eat more of it. You know, that should be the bloody message.
I am 100% behind you on that. You know, there was a recent study out of Adelaide, you know, in Australia, where they looked at you know, life expectancy, 175 country. Every country that ate more meat, which includes beef, lived longer. And as you mentioned, as they become more affluent, the first thing they do, I'm tired of eating these friggin' cassava root and beans. I want some real food. So we're gonna see that for sure.
Yeah, and we'll help their health so much.
Absolutely. I believe it does. I mean, the nice thing about what we're doing with our company with Revero is we are absolutely demonstrating. You know, the question is meat bad or good? And it's always in the context of a full American junk food diet. And I say that's not a very good way to answer that question. And so when I get people that eat exclusively beef or 90% beef and their health gets better, that should be the definitive answer in my view. I mean, I think that's the best study you can run. And so we're going to continue to do that. Max, we're running out of time. I really first of all, I appreciate what you do as a rancher in general. I appreciate you know, you being willing to educate and speak out, because I think more of your colleagues need to do that and need to do that in a very big way. And there's some great guys. I mean, I think there's guys like, I mean, I'm just looking on social media. He's a dairy farmer, Iowa dairy farmer, Dan Ventiker, which I've had on. I don't know if you've seen some of his stuff. He does a great job of just dispelling the nonsense out there. And I'd love to see someone from like, you know, a conventional beef farmer talking about the same stuff. I don't know if there's anybody out there doing that, but that would be wonderful to see. We're seeing more people step up, and I think you have to use social media, because more and more people get their information out. You know, if you want to, like I said, have generation number 5 and 6, you know, you've got to fight for it. And I think this is part of the fight. So let me know. And I will just plug for your product. The BetterFed Beef is delicious. I've been very blessed to have been able to receive some of that and try that. I think it's great. I had a ribeye this morning from you guys. I'm wearing your hat here, but
I love it. You look good.
Your duck decoy, I got to find. I moved it out for the. I like you know, Max sent me a duck decoy, but we cleaned out the room to do the podcast studio, and I've got to put it back in here. But I was sitting on my desk. Where do people go to find out more about BetterFed Beef, about your product, if they want to get some to try it out for themselves, or just learn more about what you guys do in general?
Thanks, Shawn. Our website, betterfedbeef.com, is the best place to go, and you can find us on social media as well, and betterfedbeef.com. And we have a huge frequently asked questions, you know, inside our website. Full transparency. We're not running away from anything. You know, why we use ionophores, you know, why we use antibiotics when needed, everything. So thank you, Shawn. Appreciate it. You look good too. Seriously, that cap looks great. Cheers.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks,
I really appreciate the chance to talk to you, Shawn.
Yeah, and then maybe we'll do this again down the road. And,
love it.
I really appreciate the opportunity to eat your beef. I really like it. So thank you. Everybody else, thank you very much. We'll be back tomorrow, and with the first podcast in the new studios. So a very nice one to have. So you guys take care. Have a great day. Bye, Max. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye, Shawn. Have a great weekend. Thank you.